Hello, everyone. I am really honored to be invited to be part of your community tonight. And my name is Sarah. I'm an occupational therapist and a sexuality educator. I have 20 years of experience in various therapeutic sort of spaces and a master's in sexuality studies. But you will learn a little bit more about me as we go through the presentation tonight. My aim is to give you information and tell stories that may hopefully increase or change the way you see conversations about sensitive things. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and get going because I'm really looking forward to sharing all this with you. So presumably you can see a big slide there that says embrace the awkward, how to talk to your kids about sensitive stuff like sex. So that is what we are going to be focusing on tonight. If you thought this presentation was about how to cook nutritious meals, you're in the wrong place. So hop out now unless you want to sort of embrace this opportunity to learn something new about this. The way I like to handle questions, as Tam has mentioned, is to leave them to the end, but you know, in the past, we would have tried to do it anonymously with Post-it notes if we're in sort of a room together. If you need to write an anonymous question into the chat, you can do that. And let me just go up to the chat by don't do it to me, do it to the Frollo community, which is Tam, and she will just keep an eye on all those questions. And the reason why I do that is because I have ADHD. And what that means is if I'm trying to keep an eye on the questions as well, it's just you won't get the sort of caliber of presentation that I want to give you. So a little bit about me, first of all. That photo on the left is me when I was 6. That Sarah is part of the reason, or the main reason really, that I do the work I do. She was a shy child who had trouble asking for help, right? And so when I had my kids, and you see a picture of them there over on the right, they're all now teenagers, 18, 16, 14, I made a commitment to myself that they would feel able to come and ask me anything, and we would have a family culture where we talked about hard stuff. That's me graduating in the middle with my daughter from my master's a few years ago now. So why are we here? Why would you spend a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock in the time zone I'm in anyway, coming to learn about talking about sensitive things? I'm going to guess, all right, based on the hundreds of parents that I've spent time with. It may be that you remember being a teenager or being a tween or being a younger child and feeling insecure either about your body or about anything to do with relationships or growing up. You might have felt disconnected from the adults who were responsible for your care and probably loved you very much. But there was this sense that perhaps you felt broken. Your body was doing things that you didn't think it should do, or it looked a way you didn't think it should look, or you had an interest in someone at school or a crush that didn't feel natural or normal, and you felt a bit broken. And finally, you might actually have a memory of something in your past that caused you a great deal of pain, right? And all these words that I've put there are things you want to avoid for your young person, the child or children you are raising. So instead of those 4 things, maybe you are looking to create a child who feels supported, to do with what their body looks like, how it's changing. You might want them to feel this huge sense of safety, that that they know without a shadow of a doubt that whatever is going on, they can come and talk to you about it. You probably want them to feel connected and understood, right? So this sense of an experience you might have had growing up, the culture that you were raised in, you want something different. So now we're looking at the opposite, essentially. So given that you want to create a culture that your child feels safe, understood, supported, and connected, what most parents are going to ask me for if they come up to me after a presentation like this, or they reach out to me on Instagram, is, Sarah, what is age appropriate to talk about with my child? And then they'll put in an age range, 6, 8. I've got a 10-year-old now. I've got a 2-year-old, and they just walked in on me changing my tampon or my pad or whatever. What is the age appropriate way to talk to children of all those different ages? However, this is the face that most parents will make when I give them a list of age appropriate information. So for example, in a small training I did recently, I taught live, it was for families of with a child or children 7 and under, and there was 212 age appropriate topics of conversation that families can have with children 7 and under. So you can sort of imagine, like, 212, what? You mean it's not just what a period is or how a baby's made? No, it's vastly more than that, right? So if it's not age appropriate information that is going to help you talk about sensitive subjects like sex, then what are the things that you need? You might be wondering that. Here is what we're going to talk about first. We need to understand the invisible influence of normal. Now, what I love about being in this community, right? So you're all parenting solo or co-parenting or some sort of version of parenting that, and we're going to use this word normal, right, is slightly different from perhaps the majority of the parents in your parenting community outside, in your non-Frollo parenting community, right? So that's one of the influences of normal related to parenting. That normal parenting, usually you're doing it with someone else. But there are huge swathes of normal expectations that we have that are related to sensitive subjects. Now, oops, I should have given you a little warning about that. There is now a picture of a snake coming up. And the reason why I'm putting a snake on screen is because I want to tell you a story about how I discovered an invisible influence of normal in my life. So here we go. So you can hear from my voice, I'm Australian. I live in Ireland though, and I've lived in Ireland for just gone 20 years, right? So a long time. But when I first arrived in Dublin, I was a 30-something Australian who had been brought up in Melbourne. And one of the things that pretty much all kids who are raised in Australia will learn is about snake safety, right? So we are taught that you look down at the ground when you're walking along, you make loud noises, you're always careful for snakes, you're always on the lookout for snakes. And I remember the first few months of being here, I went for a walk up in the Dublin mountains. If you don't know Dublin geography, there's a series of mountains and hills to the south of the city, and it's really beautiful and lots of ferny fields and lots of bracken and all sorts of things. And so there are times when you can't see your feet. And so I was walking along doing my usual thing of looking for snakes, looking for snakes, looking for snakes, looking for snakes. And you might not know this about Ireland, but Ireland has no snakes. And so all of a sudden, there was this sort of like explosion in my mind where I noticed I was looking for snakes, but actually I knew in my head there are no snakes in Ireland. So what was happening there was that the programming that I'd received when I was young, which was it's normal to look for snakes and be scared of snakes, was completely out of kilter with what the reality of where I was then, right? I was programmed to look for snakes and fear snakes, but there was no snakes in Ireland. So what does our past then teach us about sex, this idea of what is normal about sex? Because if we can have a look and get clear on what we have learned is normal to do with sensitive subjects and parenting, Then we can start to unpick how these things influence our behavior and do something different. Okay, so probably I would be willing to bet money on it. You have, not on purpose, but the adults and the people around you when you're growing up probably taught you a few things that were scary related to sexuality and sex. So I'm going to go through those now and let's see if any of these resonate with you. Sex can often be dangerous. So one of the ways we might have learnt this normal idea is if the adults around us, or if our school sexuality education focused very much on prevention of harm. So prevention of unplanned pregnancy, prevention of sexually transmitted infections, prevention of consent violations or some sort of abuse, right? And so the subtext when we talk about all those things is that there's a lot of dangerous stuff going on related to sexuality, right? Particularly also if there was an absence of information about healthy relationships and how to negotiate pleasurable things and what are some of the ways that bodies can feel nice to touch, right? Here's another normal idea that you might have picked up along the way, that sex is either right or wrong. There's right ways to do sex and there's wrong ways to do sex. One of the ones that I remember from my growing up is that there, and I'm using sex in a broad sense, right? So the rule around like, do you kiss someone if you're just starting to go out with them? Like, how many weeks should you leave it before you go to first base, or whatever that language is? If you can remember back to your teens when you were possibly exploring who you were and what it felt like to share your body with someone else, there was probably this sense of right and wrong. And the adults may have been either encouraging those things. You don't sleep over if you've only been going out for a particular period of time, or nobody sleeps over at your house at all. Who do you think you are even asking? So this idea that intimacy can be right or wrong. This third one, sex is dirty. We might have learnt this when we were very young. And I'm using sex loosely, but say when we were 3, 4, or 5, and we were discovering our genitals, for example, we might have had our hands down our pants. How did the adult who was caring for us and most likely was doing the best they could react to us when we did that? Probably it wouldn't have been a supportive, kind, caring thing. They would have been absolutely focused on that is a dirty thing to do. Maybe they were worried that we were sexualized in some way. And so they probably told us off and maybe told us we were dirty. I've had a few stories from parents in my communities who say they have very clear memories of, usually it's their mum actually, coming into the room, catching them with their hands down their pants. And this is not just one, this is people of all different genders, catching them with their hand down their pants and saying, you disgusting child. Stop doing that. Go and wash your hands. We don't do that in this house. Right. And that parent would not have been doing that on purpose to upset their child, but more so almost in a protective capacity, as like, if anyone sees you do that, they would think you are bad and naughty and wrong. So there are lots of things that are filtered into our head. And then this idea that the word sex and children, or those two ideas, do not go together, right? And that could be holding us back from having conversations with our children in an open, natural, and flowing sort of way. So let's do a little thought experiment for a minute now. If you imagined you were picking up whatever main newspaper it is where you live, and it had the word sex in the headline and it had the word children in the headline, can you imagine, and this is rhetorical, just think about it in your head, can you imagine what would you guess that article is going to be about? Right, so you're having a little think about it. If you're like me, your brain probably goes to the idea of some sort of abusive situation. right? And so there are all that is coming to my head, and we're thinking like, I cannot see a clear path to having conversations about sensitive things related to sexuality or sex in my family. It just doesn't make sense, again, because of this invisible influence of normal. And then this final one, information about sex leads to early sex, and therefore sex is dangerous, sex can be wrong and it's dirty, and therefore we wouldn't want to set our growing kids and young people up to have sex earlier or to experiment, right? So it becomes this circle. All right, that was a lot, right? And it can feel pretty heavy. And I acknowledge that some of you may be at this point go, oh goodness, this is a really heavy topic for tonight. It does get lighter. All right, and here we go. So given that we've just gone through all those lessons that we might have learned as children, you may be feeling like, I feel like I have to be Elastigirl or Wonder Woman or Mr. Incredible to get to the point where I'm parenting through all this murkiness that might be going on, habits that have formed from the way we were raised. It doesn't have to be like that though. And here I'm going to give you the reality. So we've looked at the invisible influence of what's normal and what our world might think is normal, or what our family might have taught us is normal, right? But now I'm going to talk to you about the reality. So this is the opposite of actually that. So this is the version of no snakes in Ireland, right? Sexuality is a neutral thing. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. It's part of us, like our respiratory system or our digestive system, our skin, our bones, our muscles. Of course, things about us as humans can go wrong. We can break a leg. We can get Crohn's disease or COVID-19. It affects different systems of our body. But the premise of it is that we are neutral. Sometimes bad things happen to us, and sometimes really amazing things happen to us. And most of the time, we're just bumbling along. Then the second one is that sexuality, having a sexual part of ourselves, is part of being human at every age, even before birth. So the child or children that you are raising have a sexual self, and it doesn't matter what age they are. That might be a bit shocking, right? But that is absolutely the case. It's a developing sexual self. Our sexual selves are different for absolutely everybody. As your young person and child grows, they will start to grow into into their sexual self, which means they will start to discover the people that they are interested in, if anybody, because sometimes we're interested in absolutely nobody, and that's exactly right too. They will discover what sort of things make their body feel nice. They will learn how they like to dress that makes them feel comfortable and fun and attractive, right? So another different thing is how we date. Some of you may have particular ways you like to date people, whether that's you like to go on lots of different dates, you like variety, or you only like to maybe go on one date a year, because you're really actually not too fussed. And that's an example of the way we are all different, and how our sexual self is different from the person next to us. Having a sexual self doesn't mean having sex. So this is an important point, because our child might only be 2 or 4 or whatever. They have a sexual self. That absolutely doesn't mean they're having sex, because that's not appropriate for children, okay? Having sex is an adult concept. Having a sexual self is something that we learn about as we grow. So your child, if they're very small, will not have much of a sense of what their sexual self is, and that's exactly right. Okay, so you might think that you've sort of jumped straight into my holiday slideshow, and you would be right, because this is a holiday slide that I took before COVID-19, when we were still allowed to travel, because I want to transition into a conversation about pyramids now. right? And you may be asking, well, what do pyramids have to do with conversations about sexuality? And that's a very good question. So the reason I talk about pyramids is because if we have a sexual self from before we're even born, and that sexual self develops over time, then one of the best ways that parents can support growing children who are growing into teenagers and into adulthood is to consider that conversations about sexuality and the body and babies and periods and all that sort of stuff are like a pyramid. And what that means is that we are laying on information from when our children are very young, right? So you see the pyramid has a broad base at the bottom and it comes up to a point at the top. So the way that relates to conversations about sexuality is that we lay down a lot of foundational concepts when our children are very young. And as they grow up, we sort of put on more complex and more complex information until we get to the point of the most complex conversations. So that could be things like, now I'm just going to talk about difficult stuff now, sexual abuse, rape, consent violations, all the sort of unpleasantness. Those complicated conversations at the top can be things like, how do we tell someone that we're interested in them? How do we deal with rejection? What is it like to go through a breakup, right? And so when we have given our child and ourselves actually the gift of layering on information over time, those conversations at the top of the pyramid become far easier. So let's look at the very bottom of the pyramid, and I'll give you some ideas about what you can talk about with kids from 0 to 4, just to give you an idea of what the foundation of the pyramid is like. Now, I imagine that there might be people here that have kids that are older, and we don't have time to go into like huge amounts of detail about all the different ages and all the different things we can talk about. So this is the snapshot to just sort of give you an idea of what is possible. Okay, so remember, this is for kids 4 and under. I'm just going to take a little drink here. So we're naming body parts, and that includes genitals. And we are using accurate anatomical names. So penis, scrotum, foreskin. You can go into a lot of detail. Vulva, which is the outside of the genitals. You could add in the words labia and clitoris. You can absolutely do that. And the more detail that we teach our kid when they're younger, the easier it's going to be to talk about more detailed conversations the older they get. Because here's the wonderful thing about children from 0 to 4. They have no shame, right? Zero shame. They have their little scientist hat firmly put on their head for most of their awake hours, and they are just interested. And so if you were giving them names for body parts, that they wouldn't be like going, ooh, that's gross. They'd be like, oh, really? I didn't know that word, right? Kids don't go ooh and gross until they're older, like usually past 7, around the age of 8 and 9. We can talk about the fact there are different bodies for different sexes of humans. We can talk in detail about pregnancy, birth, and babies. And you might have had an experience of being able to do this in the past if you are parenting more than one child, or if in your extended family, or if you have an ex-partner and they are starting a new part of their family and there's a pregnancy involved in that, then you will have had the opportunity maybe to talk about this in detail. And for kids 0 to 4, you can use the words uterus and vagina and sperm and egg, and the details about the different ways that babies are born. You can talk about the different ways that sperms and eggs even get together. Particularly, you can definitely do that for kids around the age of 4, because most of us here will know that there is not just one way sperms and eggs get together, right? And maybe you might even be parenting a child that was conceived with IVF or artificial insemination. Our bodies feel nice to touch. The reason why that is important to talk about with kids 4 and under, is that it's the basis of consent. And we're starting to teach them that they can tune into their body and discover what they want to do for themselves. So someone might ask, would you like to go on the trampoline? Your body can tell you if you want to go on the trampoline. If someone says, would you like a cheese sandwich? Your body can actually tell you if you feel like eating a cheese sandwich, right? Discovering our own bodies and genitals is a developmentally appropriate thing for children to do around this age. That's absolutely fine for them to be touching themselves and to be noticing things about themselves, and their genitals is just another part of their body. And we as adults are giving them the tools and sort of the guidelines for what is appropriate in what parts of the house, or what's appropriate in the restaurant versus what's appropriate in our home. How are we going here? So we can also talk about the fact that our body can experience things that feel good, but also things that feel bad. And so this is part of the beginnings of teaching our child about bodily autonomy, that their body is their own. And they are the one that says what is done to it, right? That really they are the only ones allowed to touch their body. That we listen to our body so we know what feels good, and that adults have responsibilities to keep kids safe. So while kids can get a sense of what feels good for them, in the end, it's the adult's responsibility to look after them. We can tell our kids, and we can lead by example, that they are absolutely allowed to ask questions about all sorts of things, and even related to sexuality and gender. They have a right to explore their gender, right? And this, what I'm quoting from here, comes from the World Health Organization's guidelines on education and children of different ages. And then we can also, and we do this, you will be doing this already in your parenting, showing your child about the social rules and values, why we use particular table manners, why the road rules are there, like we drive on the left, why do we do that? You know, all that sort of thing that helps make our culture safe for all of us. So you'll see here, that was the beginning. Down here at sort of zero level 7, that was the sort of the foundation. That wasn't all of them. I think there are about 85, if I'm remembering rightly, different topics to talk to kids from 0 to 4 about. So you may be feeling now like, oh no, I have a child older than that, or oh no, I have a child that's 4 and there's no way that I could talk about those things. And you are not broken, and that is okay. You have been doing the very best you can with the information you had, and it's not your fault that you didn't know this, right? Because most of the time, nobody's talking about it. Most of the time, if you ask a question at the school gate that says, you know, what should I be talking about with my 4-year-old? No one, very, very few people would be saying sperms and eggs and uteruses and all that sort of thing, right? So being at this place here where you're sort of going, oops, it's okay, it's normal. So let's talk a little bit about the job of a caring, loving adult who is raising a child or children, okay? Because while it is about having conversations about specific things, it's more than that too. So one of the jobs of a parent is to give our children permission to be themselves. Now, we'll talk about diversity a little bit later on. Let me look at my clock here, we're doing okay. But permission to be themselves looks like modeling, talking about the fact that everybody is different, and we all go through a lot of times when we're discovering who we are. The story that comes to mind to illustrate this is as a family, we were in Lyon. A few years ago now, we were doing an interrailing holiday. And I don't know if you know this, but in France, well, at this pool we went to anyway, boys were not allowed to wear loose, long shorts. And that's what we had for our lads to swim in. And so we had to use this vending machine to get those little French sort of like, they look like underwear swimmers. So the boys were wearing those, and off they were into the pool. And after a while, one of my kids came out of the pool and said, Mum, it's weird. Like, my brother doesn't want to play with me. And I looked around and I could see one of the boys in the pool, chest up against the wall of the pool, sort of walking along like a crab. And I'm like, what is going on there? That's interesting. And I said, well, not everyone likes to play with everyone all of the time. What would you like to do on your own? And sent him off and he did something on his own. But that other kid was walking like a crab around the edge of the pool. And I got to thinking, I put my problem solving hat on and I'm going like, what's going on here? What could be happening? And then it occurred to me that those swimmers are very revealing, and it could be quite possible that he might have had an erection. So I waited, thought about it and thought, yeah, that could be the case, but we've never had a conversation about that. So at some point, everyone got out of the pool and we were sitting beside the pool on our towels. And I just said, I've just realized that I don't think you guys know this, but sometimes if we're swimming, you can get, your penis can change shape. And people don't really talk about that, but I just wanted to let you know that if that ever happens to you, that's really normal, right? And my child's face is like, that just happened to me. And I was like, wow, really? And that was an example of giving them permission to be themselves and to sort of talk about their experience of what it felt like to be in their body. Normalizing conversations about sexuality is another job that we can do. And remember, what we're trying to do is lay that broad, stable base in the base of our pyramid. So not only do we talk about a lot of different things, we talk about it often. Just like when you are teaching your child table manners, I'm sure you didn't just say to them, don't use your hand to eat your peas, please use your spoon. You probably didn't do that once. If you're like me, you probably did it over and 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 over again. Repetition is our friend as parents. Like, go and clean your teeth, go and clean your teeth, go and clean your teeth. Please put on your seatbelt, please put on your seatbelt, please put on your seatbelt. Same thing here with this, that we are normalizing conversations about sexuality by having them often. So we're talking about it early and we're talking often. One of our jobs as adults is to show that we talk about things by going first. Now, I can't actually think of any other area of parenting where we expect our child to be the one that asks for something that will keep them safe, right? So I did not wait, and I don't imagine you waited either, for your child to ask you to put them in their tiny little baby car seat. In fact, we did that anyway, even if they didn't ask. Right? We don't wait for our child to ask us to teach them how to cross the road safely. We do that without them asking. We don't wait to put our child to bed until they ask for us to do that, because we know they need a certain amount of sleep, so we put them to bed. And in the same way, we start talking about sensitive things related to the body before our child asks questions. Okay? This one is very much to do with building connection as we talk about sensitive things. So as we lay the foundation of talking about, did you know that when kids get older, they grow hair in all sorts of interesting and different places? One of those places is under their arms, and another place is around their penis or their vulva or whatever word you use, right? So that is an example of telling a piece of information to a child. But equally, if our child is experiencing something like they feel anxious about, or they hear something in the playground that they don't understand, like I remember hearing a story of a 10-year-old who came home and asked their mum what was rape, right? And so there can be very complex conversations that come up, or very complex, difficult situations around liking someone, or, all sorts of things. And if we haven't shown our child that we know how to listen to them around complex things, then they're going to be less likely to come and chat to us. And then here's the slide about diversity and difference. And this is super important, that we develop a culture of, you know, everyone is different and that's absolutely okay. In our house, we accept that there are all different sorts of people. There are all different sorts of families, right? You by the very nature of the structure of your family, if you're parenting solo, you already have an example of difference, and your child will be well aware of that difference. And how can you celebrate differences in other areas as well? So maybe there are other sorts of families in your community, or you can find books that talk about the diversity of families. No doubt most of you have something like that. And that level of acceptance of diversity, whether that's in family structure or something else, equally applies to the size of people's bodies, whether they want to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or some sort of special friend, how quickly people are growing up, you know, what's happening in puberty, all that is examples of diversity. And when we show that we accept diversity in our family, again, our child is more likely to come to us and talk about things. Now, that is a lot of information, right? And I think this slide is important because I want to make sure you hear this really clearly. So just listen in for a moment if you're multitasking. You have heard a lot of things that you could be doing, right? There's a lot of stuff there. And it would be very easy to take that information and sort of beat yourself with a sharp stick, or sort of feel a bit like, oh, I'm so behind, or whatever it is. So be careful, because those feelings, they don't help, right? They just make it more difficult. And one of the ways to sort of help, I guess, with this is to say that some people take many, many months, years even, to unpick that invisible influence of normal that most of us were given when we were growing up. And so now as parents, it is too much to expect that after one 45-minute presentation, you're able to unpick 40 years of stigma building and silence, right? So just be aware of that. I have a method called the Evolved Family Method, which is one of the ways, well, it's the main method that all my courses that I teach are built on. And it essentially focuses on how do we get the skills to unpick that silence and shame, right? And how can we do that in community? Just like you have a community here that supports you with your family structures and maybe repartnering or whatever is going on in your family, you understand how beneficial community can be, right? So we don't feel like we're on our own, we're struggling with something. Well, this is the same thing. Like, it's important to find support for something if it doesn't come naturally to you. And that is exactly right. It's exactly the right way to do it, to give yourself time and patience and learn the skills. So here's some of the ways that you can get ongoing support, right? So one of them is my Instagram page is I am Sarah Sproule. And every week I publish a podcast called Sitting in a Car, because I don't know about you, but I sit in a car a lot as a parent, whether it's taking someone here, there, or everywhere, or sort of hiding from the noise and chaos that is in my house before I go in to make the dinner. And Sitting in a Car is a question from a real family that I answer one question each week. And the idea is it gives you a snapshot of something very specific, whether that's some of the ones I've answered lately is a 5-year-old little boy who likes to dress up in a lycra ballet costume that his cousin has lent him, and what's going on there, how do I talk to him about it? My 2.5-year-old, I'm breastfeeding my second baby, and my 2.5-year-old is asking me questions, and I feel embarrassed and I don't know how to answer her questions. We had one the other day about my 4-year-old walked in when I was changing my menstrual cup, and he was upset and worried, and now I don't know what to do. One final question was a dad asking, like, I'm parenting on my own. I need to talk to my girls about periods. How do I do that? What do I do? Right? So normal, everyday questions about sensitive stuff. And so this would be the place you can get free resources. If you go to the link in my bio, there's a few things that you can sign up for. Like I've got a free resource on how to actually specifically talk to kids about sperms and eggs getting together, the 3 different ways. There's one about body image there. You have a look. There's plenty of options. Oh, and here we are. We're at question time. So that's great.
Well,
Good, good,
amazing. That
good.
was so much information. That was brilliant. I think I've definitely found that really interesting, and I'm sure that everyone else did as well. Um, I've had one question. I've had a couple privately, and I've had
Mhm.
one publicly. So I've had one that says, "Where can we access the pyramid chart that you showed, kind of in full?" I guess because that was really interesting, and obviously has so much information as part of it.
It does. It does. That is something I've actually developed for my courses. So one of the ways I will often reference it in sitting in a car. I teach it inside the Evolve School, which is where I teach the whole program. So we have 9 pyramids of progress that goes through there, as well as like how do you start a sentence and how do you take care of yourself? Because like I've said, it's not just about having the information. It's absolutely about having the skills to manage our own emotions, managing the emotions of our child, because for some children, depending on their age, if you, so say those, those 8 topics or whatever, if you go back into the recording and screen capture those slides, and even if you talk about something that's for a child 4 and under, with a child that's 8 or 9, they can sometimes react emotionally and with embarrassment. All right. So it's not just about the information. It's about how do we have the skills to manage our child's emotions. And that is an emotional intelligence component and a communication skills component. So all these 3 things about the information, the skills to have the conversations, whether that's to start sentences or to answer questions. And then how do we care for ourselves? Because this is subversive work. I am not going to lie, right? If you have conversations with kids that are age appropriate, most of the people around you are going to think you're doing it wrong, right? And so what that means is you are a pioneer in your community, and kudos to you for that, right? Most things that are important for our children can often have some element of going against the flow. Many of you probably get a sense of that already. You probably have lived experiences of that, right? So just to be aware of that.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone's messaged me privately to ask, have you got any advice around 2 parents that are now co-parenting, so they're not together, but very different ideas of how to have these conversations? So I guess maybe one parent who wanted to be really open and have these kind of conversations, and one parent that was completely set against it. How do you bridge that difference, I guess?
Yes. And this is a great question. And actually, most of you will probably have the tools in your toolkit already for this. So think back to any other issue you have in your co-parenting situation, if you're co-parenting or if it's estranged, whatever it is. And let's say you have different opinions on the amount of sugary treats. Okay. So what strategies do you use to deal with the conflict around 2 different households? In the same way, with conversations about sensitive things, it is absolutely about planting your feet on the ground and making the decision that is right for your child, right? And in our case here, it is having conversations about sensitive things. So if their other parent is against that, then one of the strategies I teach inside the Evolve School is it's called, I use the term naming the elephant, and essentially what it is it's a tactical empathy sort of skill. So it's absolutely about mirroring back to the adult who is angry or upset with you all the things all the vitriolic, unpleasant things they're probably thinking about you, right? This is, it's counterintuitive, but it works really well. So I'm sitting here, I'm going to do my sensitive conversations. My ex is coming at me because they don't want me to have them. So I will say something like, it must look like I'm sexualizing our kid. It must feel like I am talking about things that are way too advanced for a child who's 6. It must seem like I'm actively trying to damage our child, whatever it is. And in fact, your mind, as I'm saying these things, you can probably think of the things that your child's parent would say, right? And what you do is you say them. You say them back to them so they understand completely that you get what it's like to be on the other side of this, right? And I'm not saying it changes their mind. It absolutely won't change their mind. And you can't change people's mind with research. If you got the replay of this and you sent it to that parent, their mind wouldn't be changed. It's called confirmation bias. We don't let in information that doesn't support our worldview. Okay, so it's absolutely about backing yourself, knowing that with deep conviction that this is the right thing, and stepping up and running the interference for the good of your child. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I've had another one sent to me from someone who says, I have a 10-year-old and I haven't had these kinds of conversations, although I feel I should. What's the best way to kind of start this without jumping in and overwhelming them when I haven't previously wanted to have these conversations? Yes,
this is such a beautiful question, and thank you for asking. So I've got a sentence starter strategy inside the Evolve School. It's called I learned something new today. So this is what you can do. You can go up to your 10-year-old and you might even like to start with an apology. You might like to say, I need to apologize to you. And they'll be like, if they're anything like my kids are like, what are you doing? Apologize to me. What's going on? Really hooked in and interested, right? And I need to apologize to you. I learned something new today. And they'll be like, right. And then you can say, what I learned was that I could have been talking to you from when you were really small about some really important stuff. And unfortunately, I did not know. I didn't know. And they might ask at this point, well, what important stuff? And you could say something, well, it's actually a bit embarrassing. And they'll go like, what? Because no human brain likes an open story loop. So essentially what you've done is like you've left them on a cliffhanger, like the end of a Netflix episode, when you just can't wait, you have to actually watch the next thing. That strategy of sort of not giving them all the information at once, it keeps them sort of hooked in, particularly 10-year kids that are 10. And you can say, okay, this is probably going to be embarrassing, and just let them know it's going to be embarrassing, because they have full-on squick factor, that developmental like embarrassment thing, entrenched in their body now, right? Can't do much about that. So you're going to then say that it's all about bodies and puberty and babies and all that. And then you can say, look, you're 10 now, and I would really like your help with this. So maybe we can have a meeting in a week's time or in a few days' time or whatever you think is right, and talk about some of the ways that you can get the information you need in a way that feels good for you, right? Can you see, like, my body feels all warm and lovely when I think about that like that, because what you're doing is you're bringing your child in and creating a culture of collaboration, and they will respond well to that. Okay. But at the same time, you are the adult, and just like they need to put on seatbelts, they also need this information. They need to have conversations. So that's a non-negotiable. But what is negotiable is how you go about doing it.
I think that's really lovely. I think that's such good advice, because I imagine there will be a lot of parents potentially in that sort of situation that maybe have had some conversation, but maybe this type, this kind of meetup might make them go, wow, do you know what, I can do that. And I think that's a really lovely way of having that conversation. I've had another person who has then said, do you have any advice for parents of children with learning difficulties? My son is 7, but a few years behind his peers. I'm aware this makes him more vulnerable socially, so it's very important that he feels he can always talk to me about sensitive issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's if there's any child that needs sort of more information and more ongoing conversation, it's a child like what you're describing. So the important thing is that we don't shy away from the information, because the information is still important. But it's like, well, how do we talk about those same concepts, but simply, right? So let me think of an example. So let's talk about our body autonomy, that our body is our own, right? You can get books. Let me see, do I have one? I don't have any books at the moment, but you can get books that you could read about the fact that our body is our own. There's one. This is it's classic Murphy's Law. I can't actually find that book, but I came across some other ones, which for this particular situation, not specifically related to body autonomy, but this book is called Your Whole Body. This is brand new. It's only been published in the last 2 weeks. Lizzie DeYoung-Charbonnet. I'm just going to bring that up. Can everyone see Lizzie DeYoung-Charbonnet? I think my French pronunciation isn't that great. And the reason why I'm showing you this book is this book has all the parts of the body, like hair, uvula, teeth, tongue, like very detailed, cheek, temple, jaw, chin, right? So really detailed body, but it also has genitals. So let me find them, if I can find them. Here, it's got a page for a penis and a page for a vulva. So can you see that? That's a penis. And it even shows like foreskin, glands, crown, very detailed. And this one is the vulva, just letting you know, you're not going to see a vulva. Okay, and it has clitoris, urethra, labia. So for a child with learning issues, getting clear and setting a culture in your home that we use these words all the time, we use them. We're going to keep talking about them. We're going to keep talking about, we're going to keep talking about them. And we're going to continually say that these parts are only for you. And you can say it. And some people don't know that rule. Now, can you hear how I'm saying that? This is not fear mongering. This is saying these parts are for you. I'm your mom or your dad or whatever, and I can help you with them. I'm the person you come to if there's a problem. Some people don't know that rule, right? Either because their parents haven't taught them, or because, you know, maybe whatever, maybe they know the rule, but they don't care about the rule, right? And your child will understand that concept, because that doesn't just happen related to private parts and genitals. People know rules and don't care about rules related to road rules, related to selling on tickets to sporting events, if that's illegal. I don't know if it is, but you see what I'm saying? And so with a child with learning complexity, you are taking ways that you explain other things and bringing it into this same space. This is no different to anything else. No different to anything else. And just while I'm here, I'm just going to show you some other books. Sex is a Funny Word by Corey Silverberg is a lovely book. It's sort of for kids from sort of 7 and 8. And Making a Baby, if you'd like a book on making a baby, by Rachel Greener. This has got the 3 different methods of conception in it. And you could read this from kids who are 6. This is a great bedtime story. I used to read conception books to my kids, like the sperm's racing along and it's trying to find the egg, and oh my goodness, what's happening now? And oh yay, or oh no, right? So just it's culture shifting. You might notice in this call that all of a sudden you're realizing, oh, this can be like anything else. I can make this fun. I can laugh about this. I can embrace the fact that it's a little bit awkward and we can laugh about it, or I can sort of like throw myself under the bus and say, oh no, I forgot to have these conversations. I've missed a whole section of how to be a human being out. Can you believe how silly I've been? So may I encourage you to sort of embrace this and see how sort of joyful and relaxed you can make it. And at the same time, acknowledging there's a lot of programming inside most of us that could make it complex. Any more questions?
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I've had some really lovely comments in the chat. So people saying, thank you, Sarah, for the real life examples. It's really helpful. This has been amazing, really, really valuable and educational. Thank you. Really informative. Someone said, I'm really happy I joined this. It's really put me at ease. I talk to my girls a lot, but I've always been worried I say too much. I now feel really confident. So some really lovely comments. So thank you so, so much for your time. It's been amazing.
You're so welcome, and well done everyone for turning up, and anyone that's watching the replay, because just by spending a little bit of time doing this, you're giving your kid a gift, really, and probably you didn't have that gift when you were growing up. So it's wonderful to see you all here tonight.